carry on. Now, well, I'll introduce Darya while she undoes the damage icon. Many of you will know Darya because she's an overall the construction blockchain consortium. She's also Secretary General of the Association of Consultant Architects. She's also an incredibly effective researcher at King's, who's worked with me on 2 BIM research reports now, one that I mentioned earlier and one that we did for what's it called, manufacturing catapult. And she's also a graduate of the construction law MSc, and she's also a qualified architect and project manager.
I am an architect. I've been fortunate enough to work on projects like the Athens Village and regeneration of the Castle, Greenwich Peninsula and so on. I did my MSc here in construction and dispute resolution a couple of years ago, and I've been subsequent to that, as I said, I've been very fortunate to get involved with some of the research work that they're doing. David already talked to you about basically the report, the name was also involved. I led the review and revise of the building contracts of the RIA. Also the JCT suite, as you know, the RIA still publishes those, so I've actually updated those. They should be already published and ready to go. We had a consortium here that looked at quality issues for new home buyers. So in collaboration with basically the Homeowner Alliance, we've actually created a guide which will be actually uploaded into their website. And most recently, isn't it, only 3 months ago, actually, I was fortunate to actually call for a report for the Future Cities category about actually disruptive technologies in construction. Okay, now on to the agenda. Actually, as you heard about smart contract enough, so I think it might be the starting point to just kind of briefly touch on the application of the financial sector. And we talk about it's important for understanding smart contract and its application in our industry to kind of bear with me, because I will kind of go through things that a lot of you know, but I know we have people from IBM and so on who might not be familiar with the way we work. So just a little bit about basically the complexities of the sort of the current but yet prototype product process that we have. So that's actually important before just sort of running through a couple of the technologies that are actually trickling through and being talked about. I'd like to then move on. It sets the scene on to looking at then we really think that actually smart contract is what is actually suitable for us in construction, or we do need something that is actually more intelligent. So kind of intelligent. So kind of look at those, and then go back to some of the kind of issues I raised that we kind of is part of our life on a day-to-day basis, and you can judge whether one or the other will be the one that's most suited for our industry. And of course, it's important to talk about what factors are hindering its adoption. And yes, it is time for change. It's exciting times. We're at the dawn of this new era. So we'll just finish off with some food for thought before the workshop session in the afternoon. I did say I wanted to explain the definition of smart contract, but as David said, diagrams always go down really well. So basically, you've got a transaction, usually a value, that gets triggered by an event, goes into registered into smart contract. The smart contract registers within the ledger, and basically you get value out. So I thought that was actually kind of good to show. This is just an extract from the BBVA research report. It's something that you can actually download, so I won't go through this, but it actually kind of gives an indication of how basically the smart contract is kind of trickling through into the financial sector. As I said, it's free downloadable, so you don't have to read that in connection with what I wanted to start, because I said set the scene to our kind of basically our industry. Yes, it's a process of moving assembly material and equipment into completed and fully functional vehicle. Well, that's actually true with any manufacturing. But although we do have repetition it's not performed either in the same sequence, same location, same people. You can start to get just the picture. Whereas we have manufacturing, as I said, producing a standardized product, we don't actually do that. We have a kind of projects that actually rely really heavily on, I think it's mentioned across the two presentations, across a diverse network of people, products, services, and really a huge number of interconnected delivery and payment processes. Now you add to that the fact that it's very complicated and very lengthy. It actually, obligations of parties are very complex. We do need flexibility and change, as you're all kind of familiar with construction. Payments, yes, we agree that there are actually regular intervals, but what is budgeted at the outset and what is actually the actual when we get to that stage is not one and the same. So that's with flexibility that we need when it comes to things like that, and we'll come to this later. It's possible, it's not possible, sorry. It's not possible to set it straight right back. Why? Because there is a need, and I think it's been actually just reinforcing what was being said earlier. We need flexibility and change in our process. And of course, it's heavily contractual orientated. And then refer to Dr. Mason. I've actually taken that slide from his presentation recently. You can see the contractual relationship that you need to have on a sort of basically any construction projects. Okay, yes, then a real enabler, and we've actually agreed that it provides a trustworthy data. We will need trustworthy data for smart contract and other basically disruptive technologies. And it does unlock basically the door to all sorts of new technologies coming through. And that's actually important. We're, as I said, start of that journey. And it is a collaborative tool. However, it's really quite interesting because I literally picked that up quite recently from just this little paper by Darya. It says BIM files are not basically readable by smart contract. We're talking about enabler, BIM, data, trustworthy. They're still not beginning to see that and to actually talk to each other. Yes, so it's a second level tool. It's a start of basically a new journey. We have a long way to go. Okay, some of these actually technologies that we already touched on already. The report that I actually mentioned at the beginning of the presentation for the Futures of Use Catapult actually runs through every single one of these technologies and gives some indication as how and where we can actually use them in the building industry. I think I've sort of set the scene hopefully now to look at basically the smart contract and contracts in total. Now, yeah, fully automated self-enforcing, that's already been mentioned. It's set of codes. It's actually a set of instructions based on if this happens, then that will happen concept. It's designed, this is very important now, the scope and content is designed by coders. They're the ones to decide the framework and the limits to the contract. And it's been acknowledged on numerous occasions that it's actually not suitable for long-running and complicated contracts. Now, add logic to that. Just imagine, say, in the future, long term actually, the two parties in the contract, they sit down behind the computer, a lot of questions are asked and answers are provided, and basically then a bespoke contract actually to do with a particular project is actually put together and sort of turn out for the parties who are going to have the contract. A long way to go, but when there's learning and logic, that can happen. Similar to the smart contract, we do have automated self-enforcing. However, we're adding, and actually it does have, an intelligent contract does have an ability to actually adapt to, actually taking the changes that might be required, as I've mentioned with the characteristics of our construction contract. It's able to learn, and it basically uses historical data. Its logical assessment can actually, as we know, things do happen across the contract. We work 5 years, even 2 years, or even 1 year contract. Things come up, variations happen, things need, unexpected things are a kind of a, basically, we actually all kind of expect, to be honest. And so, just think that that contract could actually adapt and adjust to suit. And as I said, even with that, say for example, you can assess what the situation is, and you can try and, if it need be, move kind of deadlines. Now, having said that, I'll very quickly go through some of the actually complexities that I've spoken about earlier, and you decide which one of those two contracts actually better suits our industry. As I said, change is disruptive, it's quite frequent, it affects our time, cost, quality all the time. It's a process that's long and complicated. As I said, payments as budgeted and payments as actual at the intervals are usually not one and the same. There is always a need for an element of decision-making, variations. These all need to be built into the building contract, not necessarily known at the outset of the contract. It's something that we'll actually are very good at sort of adapting and adjusting. You need to be something that we have events like discrepancies between contract documents, you issue variations, force majeure. These things are not something you can actually code in at the start with a smart contract. So now let's have a, leaving that thought, actually, let's look at just some of the factors that basically hinder adoption. You all know about confidentiality. We say yes, we can have a private blockchain, but with things like public procurement or open tender, that might not be as possible as you think. But I can prove wrong. I'm not an IT person, but I'm kind of learning like everybody else. Remember what I actually mentioned about the smart contract. The scope and content is designed by coders. Now, having said that, will the contract, construction contract, does it actually give, sort of effect to basically the contractual intention of the parties? If things are actually that fixed, actually at the start, at the outset of the contract. The duration, it did say itself actually that it's actually not very suitable for long and lengthy contracts. There's a report I read recently that actually acknowledges that. It actually it actually says, realistically, it's actually something that is good for churn-outs, high value, and repeat transactions. How often do you say that that actually applies to construction? Flexibility. Running through those complexities earlier, you realize that you have to be a bit more adaptable if you work in this industry. And they say, they constantly say that we actually, why can't we be like motor industry and so on? Well, for God's sake, we actually produce the same thing time and time again. If in that process, if one of their suppliers suddenly, I don't know, goes bankrupt, disappears, goes to Mars, the whole thing collapses because they're not used to adapt basically for change, and we are. So we're actually unique in that sense. So the smart contract wants things actually set out clearly at the outset for it to start trading. I think the example you all know is that coin that goes into the vending machine and you get things out. So basically it needs to be coded properly to be able to perform. But we need flexibility for our industry. And enforceability, I won't go into, I think David has done that already. Just an interesting one, because when we have a third party in the middle, we're actually now quite happy that we don't have, and we actually are dealing person to person. We have, how do we police it? How do we police all the system? How do we, so there's a challenge for the regulatory bodies to actually sort of control compliance. So how do you go about doing that? Just two sort of smaller but kind of really quite important points. It's not something you can run in your home computer because there's a lot of information there. So the sort of storage is a sort of issue. If you think about, say, for example, scenario, you need, say, for example, identities blockchains, content blockchain, and transactional blockchain to be able to execute basically a smart contract. And that's just on its blockchain side. If you have information from the IoT coming in there and so on, so you can imagine it just goes on and on. And the other thing that's actually quite important is that it's important to retain that chain. That chain, and that's the whole point of the chain, that everyone talks about the fact that you can actually see what happens in the back, behind you, so basically across its history. It's good, but it needs to be retained. If the information needs to be retained, if that will be needed in terms of actually a record of what information is going in to trigger the various stages of your smart contract. So penultimately, slide. What I have to say is that what's the difference between actually a contract and its legal, basically, language and a computer language? Well, they're both actually, there are different languages, but they have the same intention. But how do they come together? That's actually an interesting one that we need to do. This was just literally a food for thought, getting us ready for the sort of next stage, which is a kind of workshop on how we can actually move forward, how can we just pass those challenges and barriers. So I thought I'll just leave you food for thought with that basically quote.